we've seen a steady number of institutions refusing outright to tenure Black and other exceptional faculty of color. Our job, diverse issues in higher education, is to be the watchdog of colleges and universities. It is to publicly call out those who claim that they care about Black and brown scholars, but who consistently fail to hire and tenure minoritized scholars. Even worse, the hostility that so many faculty of color face in advancing through the ranks is so stressful that many are simply quitting academia in the droves. The latest numbers are startling. Only about 4% of tenured faculty at doctoral level institutions are Black. This is a national crisis. Today, we focus on the case of Dr. Paul C. Harris, an assistant professor at the University of Virginia. Dr. Harris's case has been attracting national media headlines and has spurred a protest movement, Tenure Paul. I'll talk to Dr. Harris about his case, and we will then broaden the conversation about tenure and promotion and the challenges that minoritized faculty face with some of the nation's top scholars and thinkers. Feel free to post your questions below and head over to Twitter to share your thoughts and comments. Be sure to tag diverse issues. Now let me welcome Dr. Paul Harris. Dr. Harris, how are you? Thank you for joining me. You're on mute, so you gotta unmute.
I'm doing well, Dr. Watson. Thank you for having me.
No, absolutely. I appreciate you taking the time. First, let me start off asking you, how are you doing? I know that the last couple of months have been extremely stressful for you and your family, but can you talk to me a little bit about how you're holding up and how you're doing during this difficult time?
Sure, I appreciate you asking. You know, it's definitely a trying season. The pandemic alone was enough, and certainly added to that, death of Black and brown bodies is just added trauma. And then this scenario, of course, has stretched us to spaces we haven't quite been before. But you know, the village helps, and we have a pretty supportive one, including all the folks hopefully gathered to view this, as well as those on the panel. And so grateful to my wife and kids and that village that's helped us get through it.
Yeah. Now, some people know about your case, but I kind of want to walk through, if we can, just the framework, the basics, so that everybody's on the same page. You're an alum of the University of Virginia, right?
Right.
Tell me a little bit about that experience, because you graduated from the institution.
Yeah, correct. Grew up in New York, born and raised there, youngest of 4 kids, and left New York to come south. Never thought I would, but I did. And 1997, I was a first year, as they call them here at the University of Virginia, graduated in 2001, stayed for graduate school in the very program that I now teach in, school counseling, and had a good time here. Certainly there were challenges for sure, but we had a pretty strong, it was about 12% at that time, African-American population, Office of African-American Affairs, that was staffed with the dean, associate deans, et cetera, that ensured our success as undergraduates. And so we found a community within the larger community here at UVA that allowed us to thrive. And so I had a really good time. And of course, I made one of the best decisions of my life then, and that was finding my bride here at the university, and we've been married 15 years. So if nothing else, that was the decision that was the best.
No, that's great. That's great. Now, what was the climate like in the 90s? We know that there were some racial incidents that have sort of dogged the university across the years, but I'm just curious, what was your experience like as a student there?
No, it's a good question. Similar. I mean, I think, you know, the university has a long-standing history of challenges racially. And so that was no different during my time here. We had a series of reasons, if you will, for which we spoke up as students, protested even. And again, I think having that community within the larger community allowed for a sense of empowerment as students to do such. The town and gown divide, if you will, that's not limited to UVA, was certainly present then as well. And we as students also engaged in that space. So again, challenges, and yet the student community as well as faculty were supportive of us and helping us to thrive.
Yeah. So you earn your PhD, and in 2011, you get the opportunity to return to your alma mater. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. I worked in the field for a bit, went to Newport News, Virginia, Tidewater, worked down there at Warwick High School as a high school counselor, and then went up to Northern Virginia, the DC area, Maryland first, actually, and then Northern Virginia, worked as a high school counselor there. And then, as you put, in 2011, my alma mater had an opening, which was very rare. Most people just stayed. And when that opening came up, we decided to go for it. It came down to UVA and one other offer. The other offer was tenure track. This one wasn't at the time, but we wanted to make our home here. And so we negotiated the opportunity to transition to tenure track after a few years here.
Yeah, so 2011, you start a non-tenure track faculty position. 2014, that gets converted to a tenure track. And talk a little bit about that process. How did that happen? Is that normal? Is that normal in some ways? I guess.
No, it's not. It's not the most normal thing in the world. The opportunity was granted again during that phase of us making a decision, and tenure was always the goal. And so that was a big piece of our choosing to come here, was knowing that we had that option and that possibility of going for tenure. So those first 3 years, I was doing more of the non-tenure track, so increased teaching load, if you will, and also trying to demonstrate some research potential such that at that 3rd year review, I would be looked at similar to tenure track colleagues, but more so in a way that would determine if I should be considered for transitioning over to tenure track. And that review was positive, such that my appointment, my role was shifted to tenure track at that point. My clock started accordingly, and then here we are this many years later.
Yeah. So in 2014, you had already had a number of publications under your belt.
That's correct.
Yeah. So even though the requirement was not, as a non-tenure track faculty member, that you had to publish, you were still pretty active in your scholarly work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me to have that opportunity, I knew that would be necessary, and not just that. There was work I was just really enjoying pursuing that I still enjoy. It's the same research agenda. So there was some productivity prior to transitioning. Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about that research agenda, because I'm curious, and I'm sure many are as well, the kind of research that you do, the kind of scholarship that you're focused on. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. More broadly, the first strand of my research agenda, Dr. Watson, includes the college and career readiness of underrepresented students. So as a high school counselor, if I can tie it a little bit to my practice, because that's what has really informed my research, I was really intentional about ensuring that all students were ready for college. We know all students aren't going to go, but I was particularly passionate around seeing all students ready to go, particularly our Black and brown students, such that they could make that choice and not have the choice made for them, which historically is what tracking had done. And so my research agenda lends itself well toward that readiness process, removing the barriers or mitigating them to the extent that we can, such that all students, particularly underrepresented ones, first generation students with learning disabilities, Black and brown students, et cetera, could have that opportunity not just to go to, but to succeed in college. So that's sort of the broad umbrella under which I've published thus far. More specifically, another strand of that then is looking at the identity development of Black male student athletes. I think a question that probably captures my research well is, who are they without the ball? And so we see an over-identification with athletics, which isn't necessarily bad, except it can be to the detriment of their academic identity, which we see disproportionately with Black males. And so my research agenda began with a secondary analysis from some NCS data, just looking at the role that sports played in the lives of Black males and seeing the utility of it, and at what point that utility began to wane. And that was pretty observable even at the high school level before even getting to college, which we know Sean Harper has done some amazing work at that level and teasing that out. And so in my later years, though, after doing some more of that secondary analysis, I've gotten more into the lived experiences and stories of Black males and their identity development, what's contributed to the resilience from a strength-based perspective, and keeping sports a positive mechanism, which we all know it can be, in their lives. And so more qualitative work over the last few years is what I've been publishing on, and noticing the villages of support, the interactions with school counselors to a high degree, those kinds of pieces that can help mitigate what could be the more exploitive nature of sports, but doesn't have to be, because we all know it can be a mobilizing mechanism. We just don't see it in Black males as much, which is my goal to see. And so we've, along the way, started some programs, been passionately pursuing purpose as a high school group counseling curriculum toward that end, again, very strength-based, helping them to maximize internal and external assets, and then doing some evaluation of that intervention along the way. So that's a snapshot of of what we've been, working on over the years that we've been here.
So you're doing all the right things, right? I mean, you're publishing, your teaching is very strong, you're doing service, and you're thinking that tenure is certainly within your reach. When do you realize that there are problems in this process? When do you get the first inkling that your tenure may be in jeopardy?
Sure, that was January 31st of 2020.
So before that, you got no feedback that there were any issues at all?
No.
Wow.
There's some reflection now, to the nth degree in terms of what conversations were had, when and where and how. And there was never anything stated toward my tenure eligibility being in question.
Yeah. So you find out January of 2020, and how does that happen? Do you receive a letter? Are you meeting with your dean? What happens?
Sure. So everyone that goes up for tenure and promotion meets with the dean and the chair of promotion and tenure committee. And so at the end of January, because it was by the end of January that they had to meet with everyone. So I was literally at Friday, January 31st, called in to have the conversation with those two. And it was at that point that I was informed about the recommendation for promotion, but the denial for tenure.
So you were recommended from assistant to associate, but without tenure.
That's correct.
Yeah. And what the feedback was?
The feedback was, in essence, teaching great, service great. There was, as it was said, evidence of performing below expectations related to scholarship.
Yeah. What can you clarify? I mean, what specifically was highlighted or mentioned?
Sure. You mean more broadly? I could say more broadly what was mentioned, because that meeting didn't last too long. I needed a minute to reflect. And so I asked actually to be excused, and we met later the next week when I had some more thoughts after having been blindsided in that way. But more broadly, that conversation coupled with a letter I received on February 3rd and then another one on the 11th after I asked for some more information, communicated, again, that thesis of scholarship not being strong enough, but resting on what I eventually saw to be untruths. So that things such as citation counts, which thankfully I talk about my village a lot. I actually, when I couldn't think about it much, Dr. Watson, sent it to some colleagues of mine, and one of them sent a screenshot back to me of what Google Scholar actually said, which was drastically different from what was cited. And so that was a reason. So again, scholarship more broadly, citation count, journals that didn't have impact factors, except there were about 5 journals that were excluded from that count in that feedback. Some of the other sort of more pointed points of my appeal had to do with a particular journal that I was proud to publish in being considered or appearing as being self-published. Those were some of the primary claims, if you will, to my scholarship not being up to snuff, if you will.
Yeah, and I think the comment about one of the journals being self-published has baffled so many of us, because again, a quick search would have indicated that that's simply not true. And so again, we've got to push folk to do due diligence, particularly those who have the honor of serving on these committees as well. So you get this news. Obviously, you're devastated by it. Do you immediately appeal to the provost? What's the next step in the process?
Sure. So no, I get the news that Friday, sat in my office for a bit, told my wife, some of the immediate aftermath was just kind of sitting with it and kind of figuring out what just happened. And, there was a point, although it being brief, again, thanks to my village, a point where I thought, well, we move on. We kind of go on from here. But I decided to appeal, one, with the screenshot sent to me by my colleague and other colleagues that said, no, something's not right here. You need to, although it's going to be laborious and you shouldn't have to do it, you need to go through this letter with a fine-tooth comb and figure it out. And so upon doing that, Dr. Watson, is when I realized there was too much that was egregious in my view to look past. And so I informed my dean I plan to appeal, called the provost to get some guidance around that, and eventually submitted on March 8th of 2020.
Yeah, and the provost made a decision, and the decision was to side.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, on when?
So I submitted March 9th, my appeal
Yeah.
to the
And when did
provost.
you hear back from the provost?
Oh gosh, definitively it was May 8th. So I mean, COVID happened after, March 9th when I submitted. So I didn't follow up like I was going to do in 2 weeks. I waited till April 7th, so I followed up with an email. I didn't hear back from that email. And then May 8th was when I got the formal letter that denied the appeal due to essentially there not being enough sufficient evidence of bias or error.
Yeah. So where are you at now? Where are things at in this process? And I know it's a process, and it's a process that can take a very long time. So where are we?
Sure. Well, that again, that appeal was submitted to the provost's office. She denied it, but I simultaneously submitted what's called a grievance to the Faculty Senate Grievance Committee, who also takes up the cases of faculty where they believe it's warranted. And so the committee did believe that it was warranted. And so they kicked off their investigation after the more formal denial from the provost. And they are currently in that process right now.
Yeah. Since all of this has happened, you, I imagine, have heard from a lot of scholars around the country who are in similar situations or who have been in similar situations. I was wondering, what have you been hearing from other, particularly minoritized faculty?
It's interesting. There's something in group counseling we call universality, which when you're facilitating groups, it's meant to be a mechanism for good, for change, and that they realize they're not alone, right? And so that's a powerful dynamic of groups. And while there is something powerful about that, it's almost been jarring just how not alone I am. So I've heard a lot of commentary and narratives of other, particularly black and brown scholars, both here at UVA and abroad, and beyond, who have gone through or are going through this situation. And I think it was both to reach out and say, you're not alone, but also to reach out and say, I didn't say anything. Thank you for saying something. And there's a way forward from this, but a lot of voices that I appreciate for reaching out in that regard.
Yeah, I remember when we talked about a week ago when I wrote a column about this situation. You told me that one of the reasons why you wanted to go back to Charlottesville and to return to UVA was because you wanted minority students to also see a reflection of themselves in the classroom. That was important for you to, as a Black man, to also be a faculty member for Black students as well, and that was important. And I was wondering if you could speak a little to that.
Yeah, no, that's huge. That's huge. When my parents dropped me off in the fall of 1997, my dad was born in Georgia. My mother was born in Alabama. So they knew some things, and they migrated north with the Great Migration, like so many others with their families. They said, and I quote, they said, the reason we felt comfortable dropping you off was because of those two people in the Office of African American Affairs, Dean Sylvia Terry and Dean Rick Turner. So we know you're going to be looked out for amidst what we know is going to be some challenge here for you. And so I remember the Rick Turners, Sylvia Terrys, the Ishmael Conways, and many others, Lisa Woolfolk and Deborah McDowell, those who were there, who were strength for us, a place to breathe. And that was critical. There's no doubt that I matriculated well through that experience because of their support. And my wife, the same. And so our coming back together was an endeavor, a goal, a privilege in some ways to go back and be there for students in the ways, for all students certainly, but there was a particular eye toward the underrepresented students here, to be there for them in the ways that faculty were there for us. So we knew what we were coming back to. We had no idea, or no notion rather, naive perception of a utopia by any stretch, but we knew what work had been done on our behalf, and that was our goal.
Yeah, I want to get to a few questions if we can. Sure. One person has asked, did you have any mentors while you were navigating your way through the tenure process, while you were on tenure track? Were there mentors, particularly at UVA, to help provide some guidance to you as you were going through this process?
I did have some mentors. I had someone at Central Administration who kind of helped me navigate the university-wide sort of terrain. Had some college level folks, even some folks outside of the Curry School. I think one of the challenging sort of dynamics when I came in, at least to the program, was there not being any program specific mentors. And so I was definitely helped more broadly in terms of constructing a research agenda, et cetera, by other scholars. And those people were there and definitely added a lot to my knowledge base and portfolio. And then within the Council Red program, that was pretty much left for me and folks outside of UVA to really get that domain-specific mentorship.
Yeah. Another question: when you were granted promotion but not tenure, a question is: does your clock start over, and can you reapply for tenure then, from your understanding?
So if this were to play out, could I reapply for tenure? As I understand it now, if I were to continue with the promotion track, that would be it. And I could be told differently at some later point, but that's my understanding, that this is the opportunity for tenure.
Yeah. Another question: do you believe, or does your experience indicate a racially discriminatory hierarchy of what journals, and we'll talk a little bit about this also with the panel, what journals are considered prestigious, accepted in the discipline that you're in? Can you talk a little bit about your understanding of that?
Sure. I'll approach that from a couple of different ways. It's a good question. One, just more broadly, I've said this in the past, my life experience has been inextricably tied to race. So I'm always, that's a part of my experience. And so it's not so much if race is a factor as much as it is how it's a factor. That said more broadly, I think there's also another strand of that conversation that looks at just journal metrics more broadly and what that means and who's marginalized and who's privileged in those conversations. Yes, in terms of counselor education, we have a flagship journal with no impact factors. So that's even more speaking just to my particular professional identity in that space, not to mention the journals that I found my work to be quite appropriate for that have not been looked on as highly. And that's just citing what was put in my feedback in terms of what appeared to be self-published, in terms of what was left out of the journals that were acknowledged as such. And so I'd rather just kind of point to those artifacts, if you will, and allow anyone to extrapolate from that hierarchy that exists. But I will say explicitly that it does exist. I'm learning more about what that means for scholars of color, but in my experience, that's how it played out.
Yeah. The question was, who made the decision? Was this a dean's decision, a department chair decision, to move you from a non-tenure track to a tenure track? How did that happen? Because it is somewhat unusual at a lot of places. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, on the front end, a lot of anybody being hired knows a lot of that negotiation processes with the dean. But then once I got to that third year point, there's a committee appointed to review my narrative, my portfolio that I put together at that point as a non-tenure track member, and then they put forward a recommendation to allow me to go onto the tenure track.
Yeah. Are you aware of the external reviewers process at all? Were you made aware of that? It's a question.
Well, the process, yes. In terms of my submitting names and then them selecting some from what I submit and then selecting some that I don't know about, that about ends the extent of my knowledge of the process. I did my due diligence in submitting a name or submitting names, but then beyond that, I don't know much more.
Yeah. A more personal question someone asked is, how have you remained kind of sane or really ready to continue the fight, given how stressful this has likely been on you?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, my faith drives everything that I do. So there's no hope without, in my case, God. And so that drives everything that I do. And I see this even as unfortunate and egregious and disgusting, in my opinion, as it is, an opportunity to speak not just for me, but for those who sent me all those notes, for those who are coming after me, for students and such, because I know my case is a symptom of a larger problem. So for me, that's kept me sane, because I've been wanting to navigate well this unfortunate positioning that will be a gain for others beyond me. And my faith is at the core of that. So
the community outreach has been pretty amazing and powerful. Obviously, you're going public, and you have been public because obviously you're wanting people to understand your particular case. But as you pointed out many times, is you want there to be a larger conversation about the challenges and obstacles that minoritized faculty face within the academy. And before we transition over to the panel, this is a great opportunity for you to talk a little bit about what you hope some of those outcomes will be after this very difficult conversation and process that you're going through.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting you referenced, go back a couple of steps that, we've gone public. My wife is an amazing writer, and she asked me in June, she was writing a piece on everything that was going on. And she just said, can I put a line or two in there about your situation? We've not talked about it at all with anybody. We've played this process out like, we're supposed to do. We got the denial, appeal, all of that. And I said, sure, there's enough emotional distance, go for it. I should have known better because my wife's a really good writer. And so her stuff got picked up, and people close to us saw those few lines and thought, wait a second, we thought that was a done deal. What do you mean? And so from that, former students did their letter, the former student made the website, and it just kind of took off from there. And for which I'm happy because of the impact, again, beyond me. But to your question more specifically, the outcome, I would love the opportunity to continue my career tenured at the University of Virginia. Certainly my wife and I would have some big decisions regardless of the outcome that they present to us. But I think that opportunity and option is appropriate given what was present in my case. I also think it's important to make clear that this conversation is one that needs to be exposed more broadly. So I think an outcome such as you writing and others writing, and given this platform says, this isn't just Paul. This is a broader conversation that has gone on for years, and it needs to there needs to be some intervention toward that end. And to that end, that this conversation isn't going away. And the other outcome I'd like from this is at least a bit more insight and awareness around how policy can allow for bias to flourish. Well adhered to policy can allow bias to flourish, and for there to be a much harder look at institutions across the country around, again, upheld policies that are furthering the marginalization and oppression of a few while privileging or marginalizing many while privileging a few and perpetuating the very thing that our rhetoric is speaking against. So those are some of the outcomes I'd like from today and more broadly this conversation.
Dr. Harris, thank you so much for coming on this platform and telling your story and really encouraging that conversation to take place. So I'm grateful to you for sharing your story with us. And I also want to transition now to the panel so that we can have a larger conversation. But thank you again.
Appreciate you for having me, Dr. Watson.
All right, let's introduce our panel now. We have Dr. Donna Ford, who is a distinguished professor at The Ohio State University. We have Dr. Mary Howard Hamilton, who's a distinguished research professor at Indiana State University. Dr. Chance W. Lewis, distinguished professor of urban education at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Dr. James L. Moore III, Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer, and a tenured faculty member, and he has all these other roles as well. I'm not going to go through them all, Dr. Moore, at The Ohio State University. And Dr. Alvin J. Sexschneider, who is a senior fellow at AGB Consulting, and also, I should mention, a former college president. So thank you all for joining this important conversation. We certainly thank Dr. Harris for telling his story as well. I want to kind of just open up to the panel, just your reaction, if you have any, to what Dr. Harris has shared with us.
Well, I certainly want to say, first of all, Dr. Harris, thank you for being willing to share your story, because this is bigger than you. It is you, and it's bigger than you. And you are having impact, and I'm wishing you all the best. So it's not over. It's not the end, as you said. So this is just all too damn common, and it's infuriating. It makes me want to cry, not just to read what happened to you, Dr. Harris, but your write-up also, Dr. Watson. This is just outright wrong. And when you can detect lies, and then it really is more of an indication that how egregious this is. And so this needs to be pursued. This is too common. That's what I'm saying, too common. I look forward to sharing more comments.
Anyone else want to comment on your reaction to what was shared there?
Well, I agree with Dr. Ford, with Donna. what is happening here is that we've got antiquated policies and procedures, and we also need to make sure that we have administrators who always view tenure promotion, faculty life from a social justice and equity positioning. Always. There should always be that question. But yes, I agree wholeheartedly with Donna. This has gone on too long in the academy.
Yeah. Let's get to some questions if we can. I'm going to start with you, Donna, because what types of conduct might signal to faculty of color that they are not being fairly treated in the tenure process? And how can they respond to some of that?
Okay, so I want to say that you can be blindsided, like Dr. Harris was. No clue that there are any issues with what you're doing until it's time for promotion and tenure. You have the first year review, you have the second year review, you get reviewed at every year. And then you have either that third or fourth year review. Why was there no issue? And then in his case, this is major. How in the world, I'm trying to keep this PG-13. Okay, how in the world do you go from non-tenure track to tenure track and then not get tenure? That there is a problem with the university, their policy, and the decision makers implementing that policy. I just have to say this, that is so uncommon. And by the way, it happened to me. It happened to me as well at one point, but that is so uncommon that it is telling you that you are doing great things. So then how in the hell at the last minute, when it's time for promotion and tenure, does that reverse itself? Something is broken. A lot is broken. Yeah. A lot. So I came up with this acronym, just try to keep it brief. I came up with this acronym to describe what I think is happening. So a lot of hidden rules, but you find out what those rules are when it's promotion and tenure time or afterwards. And I'm calling it WASP. And y'all should already know why I called it WASP. But one is we get the work ethic. We are given differential treatment in terms of what work ethic. And again, it's hidden. We are expected to come to our office more. We're expected to read our emails more quickly. We're expected to attend meetings. So work ethic, W. We are expected to be more accessible. Keep your door open. Walk up and down a hall and greet people, things like that. And there's more. Another A, we're expected to be approachable. And this one really gets me. We're supposed to have this smile on our face. We're supposed to look approachable. Don't look intimidating, be entertaining, etc. And then sociable, S. Some of these faculty, some of our colleagues, want to have these dinners and cookouts and potlucks and things like that. And they expect you to come to them. Well, what if you don't want to? For example, I am afraid of dogs. And many of my colleagues would have dogs. And I wouldn't go, or I wouldn't go back after I learned they had a dog. Or if I saw them kissing a dog and cooking food, damn well I'm not coming back. I just have to say that. And then I act like I'm on a major diet and I'll just drink a bottled water. Okay. So now I don't want to eat your food and I don't want to go there. But you know what? It comes back to bite us. Or, they want to go and sit outside. Do I look like I need a tan or want one? It's hot out there. No, I don't want to sit outside. I like air condition. So, I'm being serious. WASP. And then the P, professional. They want us to look Eurocentric and act Eurocentric. And that's in terms of clothes, hair, and things like that. So it's these games, I'm trying to wrap it up. It's these games that are played that you found out later where they start comparing the number of publications that you have with your white colleagues. They should have more publications. There's more of them and there's more journals for them, more mainstream journals.
Yeah.
These publications were made for them, by them. Were you first author? How many times were you first author? Were you second? Were you solo? Did you work with your students? Man, you guys, I could just go on and on and on about at the last minute, these tricks are thrown at you. And if it's not someone like me or the panel and others, minoritized individuals on that committee, unafraid to speak up, unapologetically pissed off, this is the kind of stuff that happens to Dr. Harris and thousands and thousands and thousands of others. And that's just in terms of scholarship.
Yeah, let me go to Dr. Lewis, because what Dr. Ford, Donna, is describing feels like what folks have called, racial battle fatigue in many ways, right? And can you talk about that in the context of what you're seeing many minoritized faculty having to go through, the scars and the bruises that they have to get tenure, from the vantage point where you sit?
So from my vantage point, and once again, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. When you think about racial battle fatigue for faculty, what usually happens is that for many minority faculty, they feel compelled to fight the good fight at these universities. And in the rules of the game of these universities, they're going to bud very little in what they expect or require, especially when it comes in the tenure and promotion room. And so what often happens to many minority faculty, we put a lot of time in the service category, where we may be doing, where we may be asked by the dean to do a workshop on equity, diversity, for a faculty meeting or for a university committee. And then when it comes inside of the room for promotion and tenure, that doesn't count at all. So when you start to look at that, now the faculty member has to have this burden of doing all of this service activity when the focus, in the room is more on the scholarship and teaching. So when we think about this racial battle fatigue, it can wear a faculty member of color out, and then it takes away, time for scholarship. And I think the unique thing about Dr. Harris's case and many others around the country, he has the work. And by having the work, then, from my experience as being a chair of the college promotion and tenure committee, there's always a review on what's on the tenure documents in teaching, research, and service. But unfortunately, what I've seen in my experience over the years at many different universities, then there's another conversation that is had about fit. Okay, and this conversation is not usually for white faculty, but it's only for faculty members of color. How well do they fit in the institution? How do they fit in the department? Kind of what Donna was saying, do they seem to be good colleagues? Are they around, or are they attending the potlucks and all of these things? And that fit conversation, as a chair of a committee, of promotion and tenure committee, I would have to recenter the committee, because I said that's not on the document that we're evaluating on the fit. And so it often happens. So this racial battle fatigue for a faculty member, it takes time away, because they're being asked to do things that other faculty members are not asked to do. So they're showing up at these meetings, they have to conduct these workshops, they have to mentor, and get calls from any minority student that's on the campus that knows they hit the campus, that calls them. And all of these things add up in a time that ultimately takes away from what their main priorities are in the faculty role. So it has a ripple effect. But even in cases like Dr. Harris, when they do all the extra things plus what they're required to do, then you still see these kind of conversations that still happen inside the tenure and promotion room as well.
Yeah, I want to go to you, Dr. Howard Hamilton, because one of the things I'm hearing a lot from faculty members who told me that they were often hired because they did research on people of color, and that was sort of, they were brought in because they contributed to the diversity aspect, the diversity issue. But then when it was time for them to go up for promotion, or when they got to that third-year review, suddenly the fact that they were writing and researching about people of color all of a sudden it became a problem. So I was wondering, can you comment on that? Have you heard and have you seen that as well in your experience?
I have, and I've seen it and I've experienced it as well. The issue is that just like with Paul, once you start writing in that area, you're writing about things that make people very uncomfortable. These scholars and these individuals are reading that very dissonance-provoking material, and all of a sudden now it's, you know, this equilibrium occurs, and they don't support or don't understand what you are writing about or what you're sharing with scholars in the field. I think that a lot of minoritized scholars, what happens with us is that, and this happened to me, we're told don't write about minoritized subjects, it won't get you tenured. But that's the furthest from the truth. Now our voices and our narratives are important. Our scholars in the field must write. That's our responsibility. We must write about what's happening to us. And I do believe that as you get to this third year, that portion, that really important third year review, here are just a few things. Let me give you some how-to, a few things that minoritized scholars should do. Get to know your diversity equity person. James will know this. He's a diversity equity person at Ohio State. Get to know that person, connect with her or him, because that person has a connection with the president and the provost at the institution. That has to be a constant conduit. That person should be knowledgeable about promotion, tenure, diversity, racialized oppression. That person has to be your advocate, and that, again, that liaison with the president and the provost. And then also the other thing is, it's during that third year review, if you're starting to get some questions, here at Indiana State, we have an opportunity to write on our evaluations, to write our own questions on the evaluation form, write questions on that particularly that teaching evaluation form that pertain to your specific goals and objectives in that class. Sometimes evaluations are so nebulous that students start writing about, well, I don't like her hair, or she didn't dress up that day, or she makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, big issues, yeah, absolutely.
Big issues. Write, if you have an opportunity to write your evaluation questions for teaching, write them. The other thing is, start on that third year, start networking with colleagues in the field who can write your external review, and network with as many as possible, and they can also be your mentors. I remember when I went up for promotion at Indiana University, there were some questions, and I had a colleague who said to me, full professor, I was going up from associate to full, he said, oh, Mary, don't worry about, don't worry about promotion. There are really no big rewards for that. It's not a big deal. And what he didn't realize is that I wasn't going into this for the rewards monetarily. That was not really what I was going in to this, because I knew it was my responsibility as a Black woman. 2% of professoriate who are full professors are Black women. I knew I needed to be a full prof so I could write external reviews for these professors coming up. That's why I was intense on doing this. The other couple of things, a mentor, I know you have them, mentoring, and the chair. It is the chair, as a chair, it is the chair's responsibility to be your advocate and to guide you every step of the way. That chair is your make or break. And I don't know what happened with you. I think I read where your chair was fairly new. There's a problem. The chair is that person that gets the committee, faculty committee, on the same page with the college committee and with you. That person should be social justice and equity oriented and on your side. So that's what I want. That's the advice I give to those third year folks right now. Start lining things up. so that when you go through promotion, you've got all these people in a row to support you.
Yeah.
But my heart goes out to Paul. This is grueling. It's
Yeah.
grueling. It's humiliating.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to go to Dr. Secretary Snyder, because I know you've been a former college president, chancellor, but mentoring has been something that you have done a lot of, and I was wondering if you could comment on the importance of that, picking up from where Mary left off.
Sure, and I'll try to be brief. And I want to thank you and Diverse for inviting my participation, and I want to thank and commend Dr. Harris for his willingness to put himself out front on this very important issue. I've been a member of the Academy for close to 50 years. I was fortunate to earn a doctorate in political science at the age of 28. And so I've been around, I've seen a lot, and I continue to mentor young academics as well as a number of folk in the private sector and the public sector. But when I earned tenure at Virginia Commonwealth University, VCU, in I think 1981 or 82. And spent a fair amount of time, 14 years there actually. I spent some time with the UNC system on 2 different stints. But at VCU in particular, in the 1980s, we established a mentorship program wherein senior faculty who had gone through the tenure and review process identified and worked with incoming junior faculty to help them understand the process, to advise and guide and mentor them as they went through that process. Because ultimately, I agree with everything that's been said so far. I don't disagree with a single individual. However, notwithstanding the criteria, which are explicit and clear, ultimately it reduces to a subjective decision. And someone mentioned fit. I met my wife on the grounds of Mr. Jefferson's academical village, so I know that culture. And I won't say that it's impervious to change, but it changes very, very slowly. And so I think fit is important, but understanding that these criteria are going to be applied subjectively is very, very important. So how do you deal with that? I think our working with junior faculty to help them understand what the culture is, what goes on that's not embedded in a document, what's really important to you in your career, and helping your colleagues understand that the research that you do is as legitimate as anything that they do. And sometimes you can't do that by yourself. You need others to assist you in that process. And so, again, that's what worked at VCU when I was there many, many years ago. But I think it still has value and merit. I didn't have a mentor when I was starting my career back in 1973. I wish that I did. But that is something that's very, very common now. And so I think trying to understand how we can be helpful to one another as we are on this journey can be very, very important.
Thank you. I want to go to my friend, Dr. Moore, because, you know, one of the things that I've heard in this conversation is the subjectivity that often exists, but also the lack of policy or defined guidelines that sometimes exist towards how to obtain tenure and promotion. Can you talk a little bit about that from your years of experience?
Sure. And I would just say, well, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. It's a very important subject. And I get to say that many of the people on this panel, they're my mentors. And so certainly I would not be at this place where I am. So it's refreshing that now I can sit at the table with them. And certainly sad to hear about Paul. We're in the same discipline, and I'm very familiar with his work. And I like to think of myself as being a leader in the field. Let's say what it is. I'm not sure that department has ever tenured a Black male in the history of that department in counselor education. I know that there's been some eminent names, but they came in with tenure. That in itself, I want people to understand that backdrop of the institution. The academy is based on class arrogance and intellectual snobbery. even when you go to the right institution, they constantly try to raise the bar, and it creates some level of fatigue. When you talk about policy, I think Brother Lewis highlighted, there's the written, the unwritten, the official, the unofficial, the stated and the unstated, and how to kind of unravel all of that is quite difficult. Particularly many of us, let's face it, we have some departments at my institution that has never tenured a Black person in its history. And many of us, if I ask, and I'm always saying I've been the first, but I don't like to think because I was the first, I was the best. I like to think that was the groundswell. I was a beneficiary. So when I think about policies, I see some of the most marginal faculty try to make it hard on the next generation of faculty. Usually the productive faculty, they don't try to create challenges. They try to create a pathway for anyone's. Productive people are always thinking about being productive, and they like to be around productive. It's clear that Brother Harris was a productive scholar, and in many ways, I was appalled that is not just a department chair that we have to review. I'm appalled of the whole system. For anyone to write some of the things that I've read, I haven't actually seen the document, but if that is true, that represented the lowest level of professionalism. It represented the lowest level of academic seriousness. When I think about it, being a former program director at the National Science Foundation, we would have didacted some of that content about did he self-publish. All you had to do is go an extra step and to understand about that journal. Or you could have inquired like what we do when we don't have information. For someone to allow individuals to be able to make those kind of assertions without having the proper documentation is, to me, is academic malpractice. And let me say it again, academic malpractice. And let's say Black faculty tend to experience this, but I want you to know I've seen white faculty experience it, but it seems to be more pronounced with people of color because they don't have the networks, they don't have people like what I have on the panel that sits on these committees that can speak truth to power and hold people accountable. So the policies are only as good as those who create them. And the people who created the policies are the people who wrote that evaluation. Let's face it. And external reviews are very important. And I think I appeal to my colleagues around the country, particularly when you get in administrative ranks like myself. I do about 8 to 10 external reviews a year as an administrator. My wife said, "Why do you do it?" Because I recognize I was selected for a reason, and I take lots of time reading every part of it to be able to try to contextualize a person's work and to explain why I think that department didn't mentor someone really well. You know, sometimes it's like this: when you got numbers, they start talking about quality. When you got quality, when you got both, they got to find something. They create new rules, and I would say my critique: they create James rules. You know, you are more productive than everybody in the department, and then they say you weren't most productive than you were the year before. I think there's a psychological effect that I think you got to be prepared. And the policies, let's see, these are not computer problems. These are man-made problems. And much of the man-made problems that we're talking about, we probably wouldn't be at this place, Dr. Watson, if we didn't see the Old South crumbling all across the United States. We're at this crossroad. Well, guess what? The Old South was crumbling at Charlottesville 2 years ago. It's been crumbling for a while. And for administration to not say anything, to go mute. Let me say, I'm an administrator, but one of the things I hate is when I see powerful people get email communications and they don't even acknowledge that I received it. It fatigues people when we say we're open, we're public good, our institutions make our democracy better. That doesn't do it when we don't give the proper response. And it's clear what Brother Harris is going through. They don't have adequate system in place, because it seemed like They just making this up as they go. And now they saying the president gonna make a decision. Now we ain't had those kind of decisions in tenure and promotion. I love to see that in their pattern administration, their governance policies. We shouldn't have never got to this far. And to be honest with you, being UVA, the top public university in the United States for over 30 years, probably, for graduating Black students, this is appalling, and it should be not acceptable at UVA. It should be accepted at my university, and it shouldn't be accepted at any university in the country if we want to preserve the academy and if we want to continue to draw great talent to the jobs that we all hold.
I'm also wondering, go ahead, Donna, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to say one thing about journals. I'm tired of our journals for being relegated to second-class status. And so it's up to us to keep promoting our, urban journals, our minority journals, journals for, diverse individuals. It's up to us to educate our colleagues about our journals. And reality is there are many mainstream journals that just won't accept our work. And I just had that happen to me recently. So, okay, you didn't accept it in the mainstream journal. Fine, I will place it in a journal that I really wanted to put it in the first place. And yes, it got accepted, which is, a minority journal. So these things about impact factor, et cetera, we need to challenge them, as well as, our citation indexes. So one of my recommendations is I write 2 versions of everything. One is my Dr. Ford version for the mainstream audience, and then my Donna from Cleveland version, where I really want to say, tell it like it is. And I'm reaching both audiences. The last thing I want to say is, and I want everyone to hear this. I have never been at an institution where they would concretely tell you how many publications you need for promotion and tenure. It's a big mystery. So you have to study those in your discipline, who in your department, in your college, et cetera, who just went up to see how many they have. It is a mystery. Somehow get it in writing, send an email to your chair. Don't just have a conversation, send an email to your dean. Try to get in writing how many publications they're expecting of you, and I'm talking about peer review, annually. And therefore you can come back and rely on that. It is a mystery and it's subjective.
Yeah, let's move, if we can, to talk about the impact of these kinds of decisions, because we talk a lot about the need to increase the number of underrepresented students in doctoral programs to then diversify the academy. But Dr. Lewis, if folks see what individuals like Dr. Harris and others are going through, why in the world would they even decide to come into the academy if they have to face that degree of hostility?
Well, great question. I think in response to that question, you still have a large number of potential PhD students who are still attracted to the professoriate because they want to make an impact. So they see Dr. Harris and many others that are on the panel. And, as we know, people want to become like those that they see. And when we look at faculty members, who are going through the ranks, who have some measure of success in higher education, it's a natural recruiting tool to different programs around the country. And so that's what universities have to understand, is that when minority faculty do well, it helps the university in a greater whole, not only for recruiting minority PhD students, but other students as well. I mean, myself, like many others on the panel, we get calls from many students or potential students around the country who want to come to our universities to maybe study under us, and do different things of that nature. And it helps the whole overall university. And if I look at my own example in the PhD program I'm over in urban education, we have a large percentage of minority students that are driving the enrollment of our entire College of Education and in the PhD programs. And because we also have faculty members of color in our program, who are being successful in the academy. So I'm saying that to say, one hand is making sure faculty have what they need in the mentors and understanding the rules of engagement of tenure and promotion process, because that's where I see a lot of things happen when they don't understand the rules of engagement and understanding how to, understand and navigate the spaces. But then when these faculty are successful, making a concerted effort to now teach these PhD students, minority PhD students, who have aspirations to go in a tenure track faculty position after graduation, on how they can be prepared at graduation. So one of the things I try to do with many of my students is have them publish heavily prior to graduation, not waiting until they graduate. So in graduating students with double-digit publications coming out of the door puts them at a greater advantage in understanding the rules of the game. So I would say this, and before you move on to the next person, I think it's incumbent upon universities to make sure that the criteria is very clear, okay? Because as being chair of a college promotion and tenure committee, the criteria is not clear, okay, across the country, okay? And as Donna mentioned, no university in the country will tell you how many publications you need to get tenure, okay? So what we're saying then is that that's why that mentoring has to be important for us to understand, how to be successful, and understanding of how to utilize your racial battle fatigue in a productive way. So if you're going to do a diversity workshop for the faculty, in your department, or you're going to do something for the university, also write about it, put a book about it, and hit all sectors of that particular process, and not just have it fall in service. Because I'll close on this thought. There's not one person that I know, particularly a minority faculty, that did an equity workshop, and that was the one thing that got them over the hurdle to get tenure and promotion, okay? And I want us to think about that, because that's not the thing that will get us over, but that's what we're asked to do the most.
Yeah.
Jamal, if I may, I'd like to
Yes,
just
please,
comment. If I may, I'd like to comment on something that Dr. Ford said, and it's obvious she speaks from experience, as we all do. But I think it's germane to Dr. Harris's situation, and it has to do with helping our colleagues understand and appreciate the journals, the publications that we are inclined to publish in. They have legitimate audiences and followings, but I think it's incumbent upon us to help them understand that, our colleagues understand it, both on the committee and throughout the university. I'm reminded of the work of John Hope Franklin. His book is now in its 7th edition. One of the things that he did as a scholar was to help his fellow historians understand that Black history, or African-American history, is a part of American history. We all need to understand that it's not something that is just particular to us. And so I think we've got a responsibility to help our colleagues understand that the journals that we publish in are as important as anything that they're doing, because if they marginalize our scholarship, then we're marginalized.
Can I just add
Yes,
to
please.
that? Well, if you do work that focus on underrepresented group, Black folk, you need to be publishing in places where the best minds publish in those journals. Part of a rites of passage, and I've had the pleasure to publish in all the top education journals. But a rites of passage for most Black folk, you want to publish in the Journal of Negro Education. It's almost like you're not legit if you don't publish in the Journal of Negro Education. People outside of that don't understand it. I mean, Du Bois published in it, George Emmett Houston, all the greatest social and behavioral scientists that came from our community published in that journal. It was the rites of passage to be able to publish in it. If you write about Black people, you want to be in where you're going to get reviews, not because your review is going to be lesser, and oftentimes it's better understood. It's not a rejection, it's a revise, resubmit because you missed the mark, because these are the best minds in it. We think because it's in this mainstream journal, well, you're going to have reviewers who don't even study the groups that we study, or they're going to say you don't have a comparison group, and the comparison group got to be a white group, that you can't use other ethnic minorities as a comparison group. Has nothing to do with the methodology, the discussion, or any of those kinds of things. So I don't want people to think we're saying that we got to lesser the bar. I'm saying that our work fits in those places because some of the best minds publish in those journals. Now, let me just say this. Also, there's an element, no matter whether I believe we can tell somebody how many journals they need to publish in, but it still does not unravel the bias that individuals have, right? That's what we need. We do implicit bias. That's the biggest new thing right now that we do across America. And one of the things I'm pushing at my university, maybe we need to do it. We do it for when we hire people. Maybe we need to do it for tenure and promotion committees, because people, it's amazing to see the blind spots and how people think about it. People always impose their work, their perspective of the world. And tenure and promotion means Dr. Harris got a pathway, I have a pathway. There's no single pathway to excellence. And that's what we have to also think about. The other piece is that there needs to be greater conversation around the external reviewers. If someone does, you need to have someone in that department and say, why did we select that person to be an external reviewer? Because the person has a disciplinary focus, but the person doesn't do really what connects people is not your disciplinary focus. What connects people is your research line. And that's what I think we're struggling with, because if you're psychology, you don't get somebody from psychology. You can get somebody from psychology who don't deal with people of color or Black people. And it might be better to get somebody in education who'd use similar methodological approaches, theoretical frameworks, and they can speak to it. We got to do a better job with those external reviewers, because some of those letters stink. I've seen them. They don't say anything. It's cut and paste. It's not really going at the heart of the research level. I would say we also need to have training for when people do get tenure, because I know I got colleagues who just got tenure, and they say, so-and-so asked me to be an external reviewer. And they say, well, can you show me a letter? And I send them a letter that I've written. We need mentorship at various levels of the continuum, because the external reviewers, sometimes we don't give good guidance. I've had some places don't talk about their teaching, don't talk about that, just talk about their research, right? And some places say, tell me about everything. I mean, I have never seen them teach before, but if I know them, I can speak to it. The guidance stinks. And believe me, I give reviews from Ivy Leagues, from the next level institutions, Big Ten institutions, from HBCUs. The guidance is everywhere across discipline. And I leave outside of my discipline. I do reviews for engineering. I do them for arts and sciences and education, just like my colleagues. But when you look at all the different guidance, and I keep them, I got a whole series of them that I look at, and I was like, this is just bad. What do I supposed to do in this review? And I think that is what we should be thinking about. I would certainly love, I haven't seen, in fact, I got one at UVA. I got on my desk right now, but not in Paul's college. I would love to see what the guidance that the department chair or the dean provided to the external reviewers.
James, you're saying something that's really important. You know, not only should we look at external reviewers and their experience, the system is broken with regards to institutions only selecting individuals from peer institutions. And here's the issue. The thing is that, again, there are so few Black scholars at all of our institutions. Let's look at, like you said, let's look at our scholarship, not peer-to-peer institution. It's your level of scholarship and understanding of the discipline. Just because I'm at Indiana State does not mean I cannot review material from Ohio State, UVA, Michigan, anywhere else. Put my credentials up against anybody else in the country. The other thing is, let's also talk about Paul's case prior to his becoming a professor. The most important thing for Black scholars to do is during the interview process, make sure you ask the chair and ask the faculty who are interviewing you, tell me about your tenure and promotion process. What has been your TMP record? As a chair, I have a TMP record. I can tell you how many people I've tenured, how many people who have been promoted under me, the process, the challenges. Ask the chair. Don't be scared. Ask them. It's important, or else you'll get there and you won't know how many publications are needed, or why the faculty said, hey, the last two people, we didn't tenure them because blah, blah, blah. That is important information. Ask them during the interview process. When you're interviewing, think 3 to 7 years down the road. Ask the department, not only tell me about the TNP process, tell me about the promotion process, because you're going to speak vision into action. You want to become a full professor. Ask about the sabbatical leave. Ask those questions. They're terribly important. And take time to spend as much quality interview time with the chair as possible. Ask her those intimate questions about, tell me about your scholarship. What do you value? How do you mentor tenure track faculty? Ask the dean, how do you mentor tenure track faculty? And then last but not least, ask if there's a way that you can talk to tenure track faculty during the interview process. If they say, is there anything else you'd like to know while you're here? Yes. Yeah, I want to know. It's important. This is your life. This is your life for the next 6 to 7 years. Right. Make that interview count.
Yeah. And get it in writing. Is just not talking. Have a paper trail. Yeah. So follow up with a nice email summarizing the conversation that you had and get some responses back. And then one thing I'll say, never be complacent. Keep your bags packed, keep your CV up to date your CV every day. So I'm born on the 24th. Update your CV on the 24th. And keep looking. Never become complacent, because there's always a place for you. Yeah. You have to look and be ready.
I say amen to that.
Okay. Yeah, let's go to questions if we can. And we've got a number of questions about evaluations, student evaluations, and the role that they play in the process. Can any of you talk to that as well? There are, of course, concerns about some of the comments that faculty of color face. I know we talked about it a little bit. Anybody else want to expand on that at all?
Well, I'll be succinct, if I may, and I'll let Brother Lewis speak. I think you need a team, internal, external, for all the different areas, whether it's service, whether it's teaching and research. For those, what I know, particularly in my area, when you're in social and behavior science work, oftentimes we all get pegged for diversity-focused courses. And oftentimes you have students, particularly if you're at a predominantly white institution, that students experience microaggressions at a very high level. What I encourage people to do is to make sure you bring in external reviewers, people who can give you critical feedback but it's important, and me saying this as a disclaimer, this is one of the few professions that your peers make a decision whether or not you can be entered in the club. And you cannot move beyond feedback. So if you're hypersensitive, you really have to work through that, because some of us, we can say, I gave you my best the first time, and I've written articles, but I say I gave you my best the first time, and then somebody come back and told me a revise, resubmit. That's almost not accepting it for me sometimes, because I gave you my best the first time now. But I'm saying you got to get beyond feedback. The other piece, getting these external evaluations where someone can give you critical feedback. Not only that, how to deal with those students who are constantly needy, and that can potentially be problematic with your evaluations. And the last thing, what people don't say, oftentimes the timing of your evaluation is equal as important as the actual evaluation. If students don't do well on a test, they tend to make you pay. And it had nothing to do with you, but they'll make it about you because they didn't study and they got a bad grade, and they make it about you rather than them. So those are just some pointers that I would share.
And I would build on that and say, I'm always interrupting you, Dr. Watson.
Well, let's go to Dr. Lewis and then you, Donna, and then the next question. Go ahead.
Well, Jamal, based on your question for student feedback, one of the things from inside of the tenure and promotion room across the 3 universities where I worked is that for minority faculty, if they have any evaluations from students that are seen as negative, one strategy I would give is that they address that in their dossier, in the narrative, right? Because what happens is that if they don't address it and put it in context in the narrative, then you leave it up to the committee to make their own interpretations about it, you know, and then from that particular point, then things just don't go well from that particular standpoint. So that would be the biggest strategy is, you know, set a context, you know, from the standpoint that, you know, throughout the course, maybe things are going well. Then, you know, after a particular test, as James said, you know, students start to, you know, have negative opinions. Put that in context in the overall, you know, case of what you're making, or if you're teaching on diverse topics and you may be working with, you know, undergrad students, you know, that may be from other racial groups that never faced diversity or a course until they got to you. You know, so then you have to put that in context in the narrative, because inside of that tenure promotion room, you know, you have people from other disciplines that may not even be from your discipline, and then they can't understand why that you're getting these negative, you know, student evaluations, and maybe they've never had any, or they've had them and they didn't have to address them. But that's the biggest piece of advice I would give, is put it in context inside of that narrative, so it'd be part of the written documentation.
So the key word for me, the key word for me here is you have to be proactive. And James and Chance, you know, obviously gave some solid advice on this. And so that means, for example, collecting data, anonymous data, you know, for example, at midterm, to show that you're trying to understand what your students' needs are and you want to do well. Going to the teaching center without being told to, you know, go to some of their classes and document it, you know, keep note of it, documentation. I've never done this and I can't stand it, but I see professors, my white colleagues, and I'm not saying here at OSU, I haven't been here long enough, but white faculty bringing food and donuts and cookies and all this kind of stuff to their classes, trying to make students, you know, feel at home and comfortable. And I've seen students just love it. Well, to me, they're paying for those evaluations. They're eating their way through those evaluations. And last, it boggles my mind that any administrator does not know that our teaching evaluations will be low. I have a huge file of articles that I use for ammunition when I need to for colleagues on why our evaluations are low. Not because we're less effective, but due to many of us, too many students have an implicit and explicit bias / racism.
And that one thing about this, Donna, and that is that on top of this, you have to get peer evaluations. Ask your chair, ask those faculty to come in and observe you in class. Make sure you do that often. Sometimes folks they put it off until their 3rd year. Do it the first semester, do it the 2nd semester, do it in the summer. Peer evaluation, and those folks who are getting ready to be your naysayers, have them in there observing your classes as well, and write it up. And when they say that you did a great job and you engaged the students, have it in your dossier.
There's a question in here for Alvin. This person writes, I am beginning the implementation of a peer mentoring program with a guide for senior faculty. Can you provide some advice on these kinds of programs, specific clues or piece of advice for minority faculty? So it looks like someone, yeah.
Yes, at VCU, we had a Black faculty and staff organization. Matter of fact, it celebrates its 50th anniversary this year. We just organized the faculty and staff who wished to be involved, and nearly everyone participated. We succeeded in getting the provost to fund an off-campus retreat at which the provost and other senior administrators spent 2 days hashing out some very, very serious issues that concern Black faculty and staff. So I think first, just identifying, reaching out, and affirming that we've all got concerns that we need to address if the university is serious about the recruitment and retention of Black faculty and staff. Particularly right now, there's, a lot of platitudes are being given in higher ed, in the private sector, and in the government. I think now's the time to seize the opportunity to see just how serious people are. This is not going to go away. As I've been looking at data for a number of years, the proportion of Black faculty and staff is falling behind other ethnic groups. I'm not going to say which ones. We're all aware of which group that is. So like Avis, we've got to try harder. And I think organizing, developing a meaningful vehicle for Black faculty and staff to be supportive of one another is in the best long-term self-interest of the university itself. I mean, we spend a lot of time, the Black tax affects us in so many different ways. And so if a university president or board doesn't understand that, they're not doing anyone a favor, but this is in their own enlightened self-interest, then you've got a real problem.
Yeah, well said.
Jamal, just something for the viewers I encourage. When I was at the National Science Foundation, and naturally a focus on engineering, people were speaking to the very subject that there's a dearth of mentors that are available. But Comas Haynes at Georgia Tech, I funded him to develop a mentoring program in which emeriti faculty can be mentors. That is a place where universities can use because oftentimes Black faculty at universities, they're overextended with all types of things going on. Service at the university, service in the community, their church. Because they got a PhD, everybody think they can do everything. And so we have emeriti faculty that has that distinction at many universities. They have expertise. That's a group that I've always thought about, how do we prime the pump with that specific group? And he's written on it. We funded it at NSF because there's a dearth of historically underrepresented faculty in the engineering space. And so that's a place that I encourage some of my viewers to consider, to reach out to Dr. Haynes at Georgia Tech.
Thank you. We have only about 4 more minutes. This time is going by really quickly, and I've learned so much, so thank you all. We have a question here. How do you defend your publications when they are not a part of the citation metric, so you're told none of your publications are top tier?
They don't have to be top tier. They need to be just get as many peer reviewed as possible, and that would be your argument. So you want quality and you want quantity, but it's peer reviewed. And it just goes back to something several of us have said. There's enough information out there saying we are more challenged in getting into these top tiered journals. Some of them, anyway, these top tiered journals, and therefore we have to publish elsewhere. But go for peer reviewed. As much as possible.
I would add also to what Donna said is look at circulation, the number of people who actually read it. I would also look at acceptance rate, because some of these journals that everybody ranted and raving about with high social impact ratings, their circulation is not always as vast as some of the ones who are not. and their acceptance rates are not. So I think it's important. One of the things I've done, and I haven't did it lately because I've reached that level, and I should still do it so I can make sure I can give good guidance, is go to, I think it's Cabell's, and it highlights the circulation, the acceptance rates of each journal, and it comes out, it's online. And so you do different things, you use different metrics to identify quality. Sometimes some people publish in top tier journals, but ain't nobody citing it. So, you know, citations are equally as important. Some people use the Google, I think some people use it, but it all varies. I've seen some people who advocated, and one time I looked up their rating on Google Scholar Citation, and they were one of the weakest. It was some assistant professors who had higher rates than this person did. So I always say this is what I would say, and this is what I learned from a wise person who didn't have a PhD. You can't seek everybody's counsel. And ultimately, it got to be your career. You got to decide what career you want to have. And one thing I decided in my career, if it's going to be somebody else's career, they may need to have that career. You should study the things that you want to study, but recognize I'm hard-headed. I'll tell you that. But I'd rather fail being hard-headed than to fail to do it somebody else's way and I'm not happy. So that's just my perspective.
Well said. We are out of time. This was really a wonderful conversation. We could go on for another 2 hours, but I did want to let Dr. Harris kind of end with any thoughts or reflections that you might have about what you've heard here today.
You know, I just, it's reinforced for me the shoulders upon which I'm standing just by this virtual room right here, and certainly many other scholars. So I'm hopeful, not just regarding my particular situation, though I do think our institution, to your point, Dr. Sexknight, a little earlier, it happens slowly, but I am hopeful about those levers moving on this front more at a micro level for me. But I'm also hopeful more broadly with folks like you who are paving the way for change moving down the line, and for scholars at my level to continue that and mentoring, as you've all discussed. So I'm hopeful in listening to you, definitely more informed and inspired to continue moving forward. So thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for creating the space, and thank you for taking the time out of what I know are busy schedules to engage this topic. I'm grateful.
And thank you for being willing to engage with us. I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, Sine Reese, who's going to take us out. Thank you all for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jamal. Thanks so much for joining us.
Very proud of you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for all the participants who have joined us today. You can view past Diverse Talk Live webcasts on our website. Also, create a more compassionate and empathetic community across racial, class, religious, ethnic, and all divides. You can always go to diverseeducation.com and access all of these opportunities at the top of the homepage to enhance your awareness, your efforts, as well as your engagement. Right now, we are having a special for our Diverse Keep It Real 2 game, and where you get you buy 2 games or 2 decks of cards and get 1 free. We still have a ways to go. Are you looking for ways to have those difficult conversations about race, sexuality, politics, class, and all lives that matter? Get ahead of these conversations on your campus this fall and keep it real with Diverse 2. It's a perfect tool for getting students, staff, and faculty to have sympathy. We also have Digital Diverse and much more. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thank you.